Let's just make sure, if Bill and Kelly, can you hear us now?
Yes.
It's great. All right. Well, thanks everybody for being patient, getting started a little bit late. There's a like 8-second delay echo. We're echoing off of the far side of town and back. Okay, so we're gonna get started with our November Environment and Climate Committee meeting. Welcome. We'll start with the roll call. Just say if you're here or wave at me and I can say that you're here. Bill?
I am here.
Oh, we can't hear you, Bill. Can you say that again?
I think
He's muted.
Yes, I am here. I'm unmuted myself too.
I think because of the echo, the speaker was turned off. Maybe.
I think he's unmuted. Is the room speaker off?
It is.
Hello,
Hi,
hello,
we've got some
hello.
questions.
Test, test, test. I am unmuted on my end.
Keep talking, Bill.
Okay.
Oh,
That
we
sounds familiar. 40
No, we've
and
got a
20
delay.
years ago.
I'm on mute and my computer.
I can hear him.
Hello, hello. Test, test, test.
Everybody's
Hello?
muted on their laptops.
Okay.
2 different computers to connect to the audio.
I'll take my earbuds out and see
Yeah,
if
the
that
audio.
changes things.
Hey, Bill, this is Mike Bittner. I'm on the Zoom call as a staffer. For what it's worth, I can hear you, but I don't think any of the speakers in that room around.
Okay. Yeah, I pulled my AirPods out just to see if that was causing a problem, but it shouldn't. Well, good. Good.
We're going to take a break and get started. We're going to figure this out. Sorry.
So we can all talk amongst ourselves.
Okay, give us a quick test. Somebody's.
All right. Can you hear us and will you respond, Bill, so we can see if there's this echo? We think we got it figured out.
Okay. I can hear you loud and clearly. And
Amazing.
hopefully you can hear me.
Okay. It was perfect timing for right when I took a big bite. Okay, we're going to try that over again. Welcome to the November Environment and Climate Committee meeting. Roll call, Bill.
Hello.
Covey. Here. Kelly. Kersey is excused. Mark. Here. Neil Bonsgard is here. Peter. Here. Rory. Here. Serena.
Here.
And then our Ann or Sasha here today. Saw that. Okay, excused. We'll go ahead and move on to the approval of minutes. Has anybody looked at the minutes and needed to make any updates or clarifications? Not hearing it. Does somebody want to make a motion to approve the minutes from October 13th?
A motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, Kelly seconded. All in favor, raise your Zoom hand or your physical hand. Unless you're abstaining. Great. So that's everyone. And then Covey, are you abstaining?
Yeah.
And one abstaining. Anybody? That's everybody. Okay. Updates from Cassie. Oh, just kidding. Yeah, updates is on the schedule before public comment, but yeah.
So first update is that we do have a replacement for Kayla Duddy, who used to do our minutes and everything. So we have Melissa Mitch is here as our new Kayla, and we're very grateful. And moving forward, it will help the beginning of the meetings go smoother, I promise.
Maybe
Maybe
next
much
month.
better than when it was just me. So we're really grateful to have you here. Thank you. So Melissa will be, may sometimes be the one kind of reaching out to you in the same way that Kayla sometimes had some communications. Other updates for the home energy score this week with Neil and Peter, we met with 3 other city advisory committees to kind of have a discussion about the home energy score with them. A lot of them, when we went to council on October 16th, a lot of them actually raised concerns about the home energy score that they shared with the council. So we wanted to go back and meet with them and make sure they had accurate information. And it was a really good opportunity for Peter and Neil to kind of share the why behind the program and make that case to them. So those have been really, really good discussions and a lot of work for Peter and Neil. So thank you both for being willing.
Yeah.
Yesterday we had a double header, Affordable Housing Committee and Neighborhood Leadership Alliance back to back. So
Cassie presented, we were all answering questions. Then Cassie ran upstairs to do the next presentation, and then we continued doing questions and then jumped up there. So it was, yeah.
wow. We
Worked out well.
talked with the Affordable Housing Committee for an hour and a half. So it was definitely really good, worthwhile. And then we have initially, I can't remember exactly where we were last month, but initially we were planning on doing the first reading of the home energy score next week on 11/16. It's been postponed to December 7th. But I did get confirmed this morning that we will for sure be doing it on December 7th. So
Okay, great.
moving forward, the schedule will be first reading of the home energy score on December 7th, and then the second reading on December 21st. So we can hopefully get it wrapped up by the end of the year and with the current council. Any questions on the home energy score?
Well, maybe from that committee meeting with affordable housing, did they moderate their position at all, or was there, or was there was more listening?
I don't know if they landed on a position or not.
Both or all of the meetings, and I had to leave the last one a little bit early, but all of the meetings have been more question format, especially since the decision was moved off, or there's enough time before the next, before it goes before city council, that none of them during the meetings that we were there had an actual deliberation of having a group opinion. They just went through questions and a lot of the questions were the same questions that we had and worked through. And so just walking people through the process of how we decided on things. And there's pieces that people disagree with that, we felt like was a compromise and they felt like was not a compromise that was far enough. But just explaining it just like we did with people asking for exemptions and why we wanted to have the whole market included. But there hasn't been any concrete defined voted on concerns by any of the groups.
And I was gonna say, I did talk with the staff liaison who, I believe at least the Affordable Housing Committee will be submitting a letter to the council. I think it sounds like they'll be sharing some of their concerns. I don't know for sure if they'll be taking an official for or against stance, but they'll be sharing some concerns and then sharing some ideas that they have to address those concerns was the debrief I got this morning.
Yeah.
That was going to be my question. What were the main outstanding concerns that still remain from the sessions yesterday, I guess?
I think there's a lot of conversation about what the net effect that this will have on affordable housing in Bend is a question, because that's a top of mind, conversation throughout the community. So the net effect is the challenging one. So on an individual house, if it's not scoring well, there may be a lower sales price, but that's accurately reflecting what the house is worth. And that balance of whether that market transparency makes sense because it's providing market transparency for a buyer that's also a budget buyer and needs to know how much it costs to live in a house, or whether that's preserving capital for a low-income seller, is where a lot of the conflict that seemed like it wasn't like a structural program change that we're talking about was landing on. That.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of people were focusing on their kind of narrow scenario. I'm in this boat and this is what I'm concerned about. And so kind of focusing on, here's the why behind the whole structure, here's the why behind the logic and reasoning and the long-term intent of the plan. Yeah, people with old houses say, I think old houses should be exempt and only new ones. And people who represent new houses, like, I think only new houses should be exempt and only old ones should get it. And we've heard everything over the past couple of weeks.
But we've also heard that the broad, and we can do more of a summary too, if that's helpful, especially if people have specific questions or want, like, with what recommendations have been brought up, if we want to kind of collectively think about those considerations. But they've also, through the meetings, I think we've gotten pretty consistent comments that they were really, it shows that we've put a lot of work into this program over time. So that consistently across the board has been made clear.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
And then the other update is that we're underway with our recruitment for 2 new committee members. So the applications closed and we had 13 applicants. So we're reviewing those right now. And we'll provide some recommendations to the counselors with recommendations for who we'd like to interview. Neil, as the chair, reviewed those applications too and provided some input on just some ideas on what the committee needs. My understanding is that, and Mary, I don't know if you know the latest on this, is that they would like the new mayor to be the one appointing new committee members rather than the outgoing mayor. So that means that it may just postpone the appointments by a month or so because, so we intend to still do interviews in December, but then the actual, or Robin's here too, you're the one that could. Okay. Oh, that's true. Okay, great. Anyway, so sometime in December or January, we will appoint those new committee members. It's possible that they will not be appointed in time for our January meeting, but certainly by our February meeting. But a really good applicant pool. So we're super excited about that.
Totally trading up.
Okay, any questions about that? Okay, that's it for updates.
Great. We do have one person in the attendees if we want to go to public comment.
I don't have my slide again, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
Go ahead, Lee. Do you want me to share my screen?
That would be great, yeah. What the slide will say is that if you are a member of the public virtually attending, and if you'd like to make a public comment, you can use the raise hand function on Zoom, and then we can call on you and let you share your comment.
It doesn't look like there's no hands up on the attendees, so
Stop sharing.
public comment is closed. So we're going to, just as kind of an overview of the agenda for today, we have 2 main sections of the agenda. We have a presentation. This is an informal or informational agenda item from Leeway Engineering on the resource recovery alternatives analysis. And then we're going to have conversation about our input to council goals. So those are kind of our 2 main agenda buckets. Because you all already have food, we're going to try to maybe point your mics away from you during the presentation, but eat then, and we're not gonna have a lunch break today. So next up is you all for the presentation.
Yeah, Brittany and Preston, if you guys want to come sit up here at the table, and then just to give the committee some background. So in the community climate action plan, we have a strategy that says in the energy supply that the strategy says we will build a biodigester at the water reclamation facility. And that was a strategy that when we were putting the CCAP together, it was an idea that came up a lot, largely because at the time there was a lot of discussion, which is still a little bit of an ongoing discussion about high strength brewery waste and a desire to have a solution to manage that waste where we could also get renewable energy from. And it was a really active discussion at the point of the CCAP. And one of the ideas was that the city could be the one to actually build that facility. So that made it into the climate action plan. And then in the years following, as I started digging into that idea, just that idea and what discussions have been had and kind of where we're at with them, what we learned is that there is high strength brewery waste, and this digester idea is kind of one idea that's been discussed, but it's actually connected to this much bigger picture, which is that across the whole region, we have several kind of problematic waste materials that could use similar types of solutions to create a renewable energy project, with the biggest one actually being our fats, oils, and grease waste across in the region. And it's something that we're kind of in our utilities department had been already having a lot of discussions about how can we just potential regional solutions that the brewery waste would be a part of. And so the idea was like, maybe a digester at the water reclamation facility is the right solution, but there's also like several other potential solutions out there. And we need to kind of figure out like what's actually the best way to move forward. So it kind of triggered us doing what you're going to hear about today. So it's kind of this like precursor to the strategy that was in the CCAP. So I share that context. And so that's why we're bringing it to you all, because this project is actually a CCAP project, but it just looks a little bit different than how it was initially thought of and presented. So we have our consultant team here who I'll let introduce themselves in a minute, but they have spent about the last year doing an alternatives analysis to help us kind of understand the current conditions and opportunities that we have for resource recovery of the brew waste, but also the fats, oils, and grease waste and some others. So with that, I'll turn it over to our consultant team to give the presentation.
Good, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Park. I'm with Blue Ray Engineering Solutions, and I was the project manager on this project. And this is my colleague, Preston Van Meter. He's with West Yost Associates, and he was the technical lead for the project. So yes, as Cassie so elegantly introduced us, we're here to present to you on the findings of the alternative analysis for the resource recovery project.
Can I pause you for a second real quick? Bill and Kelly, can you all hear on the other end?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay, good. The batteries were dead yesterday, so I wanted to make sure that on those mics. So thanks.
Great, thanks. First off, we want to start off by thanking all of our wonderful stakeholders that were part of this project. So we reached out to over 35 different stakeholders here in the region, and they participated on various different levels within the project. Some just responded to a survey, others participated in an interview, and then our most dedicated stakeholders participated in a stakeholder advisory committee. So we had 16 different organizations and 21 individuals volunteer quite a bit of time to help us with this alternative analysis. And as part of the stakeholder advisory committee, they came to 4 different workshops throughout the project and helped us not only develop the alternative analysis framework itself, but also the recommendations and the solutions. It was a really great, diverse group of folks. We had waste generators, waste haulers, different utilities, and then also jurisdictional and regulatory agencies involved. And so this team had some great inputs and backgrounds within this area and provided a lot of value and energy for this project. A little bit of background on this. So looking here, I don't know if you can see my cursor on screen. Yes, you can. This is our hierarchy of waste triangle. So essentially what we're trying to do is take our waste and move it higher up on the pyramid. So we start off at the lowest at treatment or disposal of our waste. And we want to move with this project from those treatment methods up to recovering energy or recycling. So that's taking a waste and making a product from it. This project in particular looked at hauled waste. What is a hauled waste? It's a high strength liquid waste. So it's not a solid waste, so you cannot take it to the landfill. And it's also high strength liquid. So you typically can't just put it down the sewer. These different wastes up here are the ones we looked at, feedstocks we looked at. These currently are wastes that are being hauled all throughout Central Oregon, everywhere for various different types of disposal. Most of them are being lime stabilized and land applied, which is okay for some of these waste streams because that actually provides nutrients to our soils and allows for crops to grow. But some of these are problematic, and that being the top two, the brewery waste and the fat oils and grease. The brewery waste actually generates odor issues when land applied. And the fats, oils, and grease, we know is not a sustainable practice to land apply because it makes it so the soil cannot absorb nutrients and also cannot maintain moisture. And so it's not a sustainable practice. We really would like to move away from doing that in Central Oregon. Some of these other wastes, like the yard debris and food waste, are being composted at the landfill, which is great, but they're at capacity right now and they cannot expand that program anymore. And a lot of the excess of those feedstocks are already being transferred to the landfill because they don't have enough capacity to process them. And with that, Preston.
So probably the hardest part of the project is to try to figure out what is this volume of this stuff we're talking about, and get a big shout out to city staff who actually went out to these facilities and took samples and helped us quantify the volumes that we're dealing with. Once we get those samples, we can test them and determine how much energy is in them. So we can look at, okay, how do we size facilities? What do they look like? What we were able to quantify, and we don't think we've captured all of the potential feedstocks through all of the breweries in town especially, but what we were able to quantify, again, with a lot of help from city staff, was somewhere in the order of 400 truckloads of hauled waste throughout the region, majority of that in the Bend area, I would say, that really could be concentrated in a different location where we can convert it to energy. So next slide. Benefits. Obviously, this committee is interested in a lot of the benefits of the project, but reducing carbon footprint. A byproduct of a lot of these facilities is recycled water and compost. We convert the feedstocks to energy. We can create renewable natural gas. We can create electricity that's fed to the grid. And we get these kind of these waste streams into the right place in the treatment process where they're should be, which is on the solid side of the treatment plant, not coming in through the influent. So you gain more capacity in the treatment facilities that you spent a lot of money on in recent years expanding. So lots of benefits potentially, in addition to the external partnerships that would continue with that stakeholder group that we met with quite often through the project. So we centered just because we had to decide this, here's what we want to look at from a technology perspective. There's lots of ways to skin a cat in every project, but what we centered on was anaerobic digestion. So the conversion of the waste to methane gas, and then we use that gas in some way. And that's generally what all of the alternatives that we looked at centered on. We'll talk about the locations next, but one of the benefits you get is a really high quality recycled water, likely off the back end of the process, as well as highly usable Class A biosolids compost facility or compost that could be reused in city parks, or there are communities in Oregon that sell it to the public for use. So those are the byproducts we tend to see. Developed 7 alternatives. Really, the key is centered on 3 locations. We looked at a facility site up in Redmond, where one of the things we looked at as part of the study was tipping fees and cost for transport, because we're talking about trucking hauled waste all over this region. So we had a Redmond alternative. We looked at siting a facility at Not Landfill, which has about 20 years left before that facility is moved on to a new facility. And then we looked at the Bend wastewater plant. So at the Bend facility, we looked at alternatives that we would co-digest. So we would mix the solids coming off the treatment process with this waste. There's lots of examples of that in the United States and on the West Coast. And then at the Not Landfill, it would be a separate organics only composting facility. the key to whether you do the work or you do the facility at the Bend treatment plant or in some other location where it would just be organics waste processing is really just the volumes. So if you have enough volume to support the capital costs of a new facility, it makes a lot of sense. There's less regulations on that type of facility. But it really was contingent on, well, how much feedstocks do we really have? We'll get to some of the conclusions that we have related to that towards the end.
Okay, so we use a bottom line framework to complete the analysis. So it's an accounting framework that allows us to look at environmental, social, and cost impacts. And so this allows us to not just look at what is the cost benefit of a project and actually weigh in some other co-benefits within our analysis. And so we worked with our stakeholder advisory committee to develop our triple bottom line criteria. So as you can see here, we had 5 under environmental, 6 under social, and 4 under cost. And we took the criteria that the advisory committee gave us, and we used that to create the alternative analysis. And that's what kind of told us what to go calculate and what kind of inputs we needed to develop.
Are these weightings of those categories?
Yes, and so you'll see right here that yes, every category has a weighting, and that was also developed by the stakeholder advisory committee. And so those weightings tell how important that is in developing or deciding which alternative was the final one. So some criteria weight it higher than others. And I would love to go through each and every single one of those criteria, but there's just no time in a 15-minute presentation. So we're just going to skip to the results. So these are the results of the triple bottom line. So you can see the final scoring for each of the alternatives. The higher score, the better. The top 3 scored alternatives are alternative 5 and 4. Those are both co-digestion. So those are the facilities at the Bend WRF, and we're taking wastewater solids and mixing it with the hauled waste. Why these came on top is because you simply just have more feedstocks. That means more byproducts. More products and more energy generation. And then the third top ranked one is the creation of renewable natural gas at not landfill. That's an organics only digestion facility. And there's something really neat about this alternative. There's a synergy with a project already happening at the landfill. They're working on a gas capture project. And so if this project went forward, that would allow for a partnership with that gas capture project to create more renewable natural gas and then just directly input it into the gas lines and for distribution here locally. The key findings is that the first one is that any alternative would be higher on the hierarchy of waste than what is currently being practiced, the status quo, which was alternative 1. And also every single alternative scored higher than that alternative on the triple bottom line analysis. We also could generate enough, with the highest scoring alternative, we can generate enough energy to power up to 500 homes a day and also generate $1.4 million in profit annually. For the highest rated organics only facility, that generated about enough energy for 350 homes per day and $1 million of profit annually. Also that some of the highest ranking alternatives had a simple payback of fewer than 10 years. This is huge. These facilities do create revenue, and also there's a ton of funding out there to help incentivize that these type of facilities get built. And then also these facilities all produce Class A biosolid or composted soil. As Preston alluded to earlier, these are great fertilizers. They can be used locally, and you also can sell them for profit. The last 2 points are kind of more bigger picture. So first of all, that these type of facilities help us shift perception and look at our waste as resources. And the second one is that this project allowed for a very innovative approach, and we were able to look beyond our jurisdictional boundaries for partnerships with our neighboring communities and with our local industries. And through that, we were able to find better solutions. In this case, we were able to find more feedstocks, which means more energy and more products. So we just encourage that this in the next stages of this project, they continue to work collaboratively with these various different partners, and make sure that when developing policy, that policy incentivizes everyone to use these type of regional facilities, and our partners would help with that process.
So long way to go, I guess, on a project of this nature. Some things that we learned. We think there's more feedstocks. You saw the scoring of the not RNG facility versus co-digestion at the treatment plant. That's really a function of the feedstocks that we quantified. If there's double that, it might start to tip the economics a little bit. You have to build more capital infrastructure. Those partnerships might pay more benefits, and you might see some tip in the scoring in the TBL analysis. So we do think there's some additional work to be done to quantify, especially maybe on the breweries that just discharge to the sewer system. Is there a way we can pull some of their higher strength waste out, similar to what the Chutes does at their brewery? So there's another follow-up planning step, which is fairly typical. The thought is to carry those 3 alternatives that we had recommended forward and to take a deeper dive into those, a little bit more detailed look. Continued data collection. I think the partnership with city staff, I can't state enough how important that is to know. I mean, we can make assumptions on feedstocks, but to have boots on the ground actually collecting samples and giving us that data, very important. There's also partnerships with Oregon State that I'll get into on the next slide. It's about a 5-year process that we're talking about to get from where we're at to some sort of a completed project. So it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to build grant funding proposals and to get funding in place and to set capital budgets and things like that. So it's definitely the start of the process. The one thing is that Brittany alluded to, but I would like to restate, expansions of treatment facilities don't tend to have, or any public infrastructure doesn't tend to have a payback, right? It's a cost that you pay as part of your utility costs, and you kind of just pay that continually. So to have a facility that has a payback at all, 20 years, 10 years, tends to be a really good thing. So to see a 10-year payback before we've really done a lot of work is something we don't see a lot when we do these evaluations. So the one thing I would leave you with is a very viable project and really a pretty awesome opportunity. So in terms of next steps, really got to get a handle on, okay, what can we do with feedstocks? What are the breweries willing to do? Do they want to just pay more to discharge, or can we start to source separate and figure out a way to pull those additional feedstocks into a separate facility? Once we do that, go back and revisit a scoring of the alternatives and see what really does rise to the top in terms of those top 3 or 4 alternatives. The stakeholder committee was amazing. There were 4 workshops. They super technical. They were hard for guys like me that do this every day, and they kept right up with it, very engaged. I would say keeping that stakeholder committee going would be really important. There's additional partnerships. I think they're sort of separating food waste at the Oregon State campus in town. How do we, food waste is just as digestible as fog and brewery waste. Is there a way we can sort of separate there and bring that into a separate facility? Professor Radnicki at Oregon State in Corvallis is actually going to do some biogas availability studies on the waste that the city staff are collecting. That'll help us fine tune some of our alternatives analyses and see how much energy we could actually develop out of those facilities. So we think really viable. That next planning step will be the key to determining where the project goes with the city support, obviously.
With that, any questions?
And really quick, just to give you guys a little bit of context, I should have shared this at the beginning, but this agenda item is mainly informational for you all, so you don't need to come to any decisions or recommendations. But just because it is a CCAP project, so it's something we want you guys to be aware of. And as we move forward into those other stages, there may be roles for the committee to be involved in the future, or maybe something that you all would want to continue kind of advocating for, continuing to investigate further if we're to actually make it a reality. So yeah, we can open up to questions. And in addition to Brittany and Preston, we also have Matt Ziebel is sitting over here. He's in our utilities department. So he was the project manager from the city staff side. So he's a great resource. So he might be able to share some insights to some of your questions. And we also have Mike Bittner, who you've met before as the utility director, also to answer questions for you all.
Bill's on the computer, so let's hear Bill's question first.
Well, one of the words in our committee's name is climate. So I'm just curious about, I mean, I know it's one of the things that you analyze, but have you got any idea what the numbers are on greenhouse gas reductions? I mean, like, wait, at the not landfill, of course, it's methane, which is a big greenhouse contributor, turning it into essentially carbon dioxide. And then on the actual waste treatment facility, is that mostly methane that you're going to be generating electricity with? And in that case, is it the same? So is there a greenhouse gas, any greenhouse gas numbers coming out of this as a benefit?
Yeah, let me see. We have some.
I saw that you had
I'm just seeing if oh, no. We put some graphs here in the bank, and I did not add the greenhouse gas emission one, unfortunately. But I cannot tell you the numbers on top of my head, but generally, we did do the analysis on the greenhouse gas emissions. We did it by global warming potential. And so that, that normalizes for the impact to the environment for all the gases. So the status quo was the highest for the treatment method. It generates the greatest global warming potential compared to the others for treatment. And that's just because you have methane being produced as like the food waste, and the fogs waste gets decomposed in the fields and emitted to the atmosphere with no control. When it comes to creating energy though, renewable natural gas or creating the electric energy is called a low carbon technology. It's not carbon zero. And so the combustion process, just the nature of combustion process, you take methane, you combust it, and you create CO2. So there is a greenhouse gas emission impact.
Yeah, so it's net. It's the net benefit, right?
Yeah, and then yes, if you did the net benefit, you're using renewable carbon resources for that instead of using fossil fuels. So overall, it's definitely better than generating energy off of fossil fuels. So
sure. Just the reason I was kind of asking is what how it fits in there relative to the other benefits. I mean, it's always good to generate a profit. It's always good to make electricity, renewable natural gas, but in the end, part of our goal is to reduce the carbon impacts of the city.
Yep.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I had a question just about general current risks that you guys have identified, or some of the biggest hurdles that you're finding at the early stage.
The regulatory risk.
Nature of risk being environmental disasters or spills or so I think the availability of land with this area growing is a big one. There's a limited amount of supply of land, and we're land applying all of these wastes right now. Some of them shouldn't probably be land applied at the volumes that they are. So that's a near-term risk related to groundwater and just land availability. You're trucking this waste all over. Can we site a facility in a way that helps reduce some of the hauling movements that are done to the various facilities? I don't know that we spent a lot of time on that. We did look at tipping fees related to hauling distances.
I was just curious. I was part of the pilot study that Deschutes Brewery did for their digestive work back a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot that came out of that. And I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of that work, or I hope you have, because there's a lot of things to be learned from the current state. So
yeah, great. Yeah, definitely. And we looked at, there's various different risks we looked throughout the whole triple bottom line. So there was like social risks as far as like, are you close to neighborhoods? Is there going to be an impact socially to anyone? So we looked at those social risks as well. We did most of those by distances and location. And then we found that the 3 locations that we looked at, they all tend to be pretty far away from residential areas, which created like a large enough buffer so you didn't have that social risk. We also looked in that risk, like can you have what is your access to? Can this facility be easily used by everyone in the population? And what is the risk of access? And that's why the benefit of being in the Bend area is that those were located more centrally located to our population in the area. So yeah, there was various different types of risks.
Anything that kind of stood out in comparison to?
Not really, just the status quo is the environmental risks from the impacts to the soil, and then also the lack of land because they're running out of land. So those were the two biggest risks that we found.
Thank you.
Yes, in terms of the alternatives, was cost a factor that bumped any of the other alternatives off the list? Basically, do those three preferred alternatives have the highest benefits if you're to control for cost, or did cost bump any option out of that set that would have more just total gross benefits irrespective of the cost?
Actually the opposite. So the three highest, alternative 5 and 4, which were ranked 1 and 2, those were the lowest cost. But alternative number 3 was not the next lowest cost. And that got bumped up because of the social and the environmental benefits. If you normalize for the environmental and social benefits of 1 and 2, those would probably still rank towards the top. And that's because a lot of our analysis went on like how much products can you create out of your feedstocks. And so those still end up being on top when you look at that.
I get sort of, maybe this is what you're saying. So Bill's point, for example, is there an alternative that has more greenhouse gas reduction or has more total load use?
Yeah, the RNG. So the RNG option is going to have less like net greenhouse gas emissions because you're taking the gas and you're putting it in the gas pipeline, right? There's not a conversion to energy associated with that. So that one would if you just looked at it purely from a greenhouse gas perspective, that one would probably rise up a little bit. And that's one of the reasons that the potential partnership that we thought carrying these top 3 forward might have some benefit. If there's more feedstocks out there, there's more gas, the capital costs start to balance. The one thing I'd say about capital costs is if you look at the triple bottom line scoring, it's about a third between the 3 criteria. So capital costs it's not going to overwhelm the analysis. It's not 60% on cost, capital, and life cycle. It's really split between the social, the environmental, and then the cost side of the equation. So I think you're going to see alternatives that have other benefits somewhat rise to the top in that scoring.
I guess I'm thinking as a committee, if we were to see this as an alternative or an option for the committee, where if you were going to put more money into this project and you could reduce more greenhouse gas emissions, how that incremental cost, sort of the cost per some volume normalized of greenhouse gas emissions compares to other alternatives for the city. If it's one of our lowest cost options, and it would make sense just on the greenhouse gas emissions alone to consider diverting resources there.
I would add that slide in here on that graph, but they're all very similar. Not number 1, but the alternative 2 through 7 all have a very similar greenhouse gas emission. And why that is we also included in our calculation. So you put at the facility, you're not creating as much greenhouse gas emission for the renewable natural gas because you're not, causing that combustion to convert into energy. But when you use it at your home, you turn on a stove or you're burning it in a fireplace. And so there's a combustion process going there. So we did include that as well in the greenhouse gas emissions. So when you include that in, like all of them end up being very, very similar.
Okay, thanks.
Quick question. On that one slide where you had the bullets for kind of the top benefit based on all of the options, were all of those benefits based on the top 3, or are they spread out? So like the generate energy to power up to 500 homes, the 1.4 million, and the simple payback, are those all based on the top 3?
Yeah, so no. So those are based off the top alternative. So the co-digestion is alternative 5 and alternative 4. That's where you see that higher, like 500 homes of energy. The organics only digestion topped out at 355 homes of energy per day. And why that is because you're not mixing in the municipal wastewater solids, and there's a lot of energy in that feedstock. And so when you don't include that extra feedstock, you end up making less energy. So any of the standalone organics digestion facilities made a little bit less energy than you saw at the treatment plant options, which is alternative 4 and 5.
Okay, and is that same for the other 2 bullets that you had there? Because I know that you just mentioned it being based on the top alternative, but I just want to make sure it's correlated to the top 3, if that makes sense.
Yeah, all of those are top,
Okay.
are top ones.
And just to make sure I understand correctly, you're moving forward with those top 3 and kind of looking more in detail into those 3 options as potential.
That was our recommendation to the city, but I think it's more on the city staff on which ones.
Got it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
I guess one more quick follow-up, because I feel like this is related to the CCAP and our work so closely. Thanks. Would it be helpful to have a representative from the committee also be part of the stakeholder group as well, if it's moving forward in the future, if anyone's interested in that from the committee?
I mean, yeah, participation certainly welcome. We'll be generating a final report here. It's just in the review process right now. So that's something that we definitely be willing to distribute. And so people can get a little bit more familiar with the project and everything. And yeah, if there's an interest, we certainly would welcome any participation by the board here.
Yeah, and there's nothing planned right now since this phase of the project is wrapped up, but in the future we certainly can. And I was part of the stakeholder committee as well. So yeah. And I guess as far as like where we see the next steps, before moving, and Mike, you can chime in if you have a better way of explaining this, but before moving straight into feasibility studies, we are at a point, it's kind of good timing because we're beginning a facility plan. Like we're basically about to embark on a new facility planning for the future of the water reclamation facility anyway. So the first step of that is about a year to 18-month long facility plan where we basically just kind of figure out like the components of the facility that we may want to consider in future upgrades. And so now that we have this study, we will include, the intention is to include like in that facility plan, the ability to have this technology included there. So I think we see that as like the first step is getting through the facility plan and kind of making sure that that will all work out in terms of what else needs to go on there. And then probably from there, we would move into like actual feasibility study planning, which would maybe happen just in conjunction with the other planned investments out there. So is that, Mike, is that an accurate representation?
Yeah, absolutely. This calendar graphic is perfect. The results of this analysis are hitting us at the right time. We'll work with our engineering group that's diving into that collection system master plan and then the water reclamation facility planning exercise. So it's going to be a really enlightening, next 12, 24 months as we really kind of take all of these results and pool them together and sort of look at our wastewater system and our wastewater treatment processes over the long haul and really figure out where we want to invest. But Cassie's right, that facility planning exercise is where we really identify some of the next projects that we need to do. And I could fully see a deep dive analysis into cogeneration and what that price tag for that facility looks like as one of those next projects. Once we identify, okay, that's a $5, $10, $20 million investment, that's where we have to work as staff and include it into a capital improvement program and plan for it to finance it. That's where the long timeline here that Preston outlined. So we're on track, but none of this stuff happens overnight. But it's really encouraging to kind of see us on this track and taking some of these first steps towards resource recovery versus wastewater treatment. But great job, Brittany and Preston. Really agree. Really like the presentation here and just the outcomes.
I have another question. Are there any at any of these sites, but I guess since there's it looks like there's a focus on the water reclamation facility, are there any heating demands at the reclamation facility that cogeneration could offset?
Yeah, no, great question. Definitely.
Okay.
So yeah, actually right now at the facility, you all have a boiler system that's undersized. So they actually need to increase their heat generation or heat capacity in that facility. So the ability to upsize their whole digestion process and would be great. They already have heat loops installed. So if there is enough heat generated at the treatment plant, they already have the all the equipment installed to be able to use that to heat spaces throughout the treatment plant already. So that infrastructure exists. So there is some cool uses for that heat that's generated off the process.
We do have to generate heat to heat the digester. So whether it's at the Bend facility or somewhere else, there is a heating demand with all of the options because you have to maintain a set temperature on the digester.
And there's a net overproduction of heat.
We tend to have waste heat in most treatment plants.
Okay.
So then we spend a lot of time looking for ways to utilize waste heat. So waste heat's when you go by a facility. If you go by the treatment plant in Corvallis, which is right on one of the main roads in town, you see the candlestick where they're firing gas. Waste heat is generally flared. So what we try to do is find a way to use that energy rather than just flare it. And that gets back to this discussion of greenhouse gas emissions.
Great.
Cassie, was there anything as a member of the committee there? Because it does seem like you guys created all kinds of great data, with really useful things that we could use for other questions we have. I'm thinking about some of the food waste or even yard waste, compost and the like that, I'll bet a lot of people, for example, assume if you're putting things into the yard debris, that's a good thing. But if, for example, right now there's more of a waste flow or input than it can handle in a useful way, that there's sort of a household or business education component to it. Did anything like that?
Like, is there data about those waste streams basically?
Yeah, and that those waste streams are things that we should be encouraging people to, in the short term, find other uses for, or is it not that sort of situation? Right now, because it sounded like the start of this was that some of those waste streams were more than the system can currently handle, because we're still, 5 years away probably from something operational. I guess did you see, for example, that there are some waste streams that you think should be addressed in some way? Like the yard debris, I go and I bought compost from the dump myself. And so people, I know, assume that if you're putting stuff into the yard debris, it's a good thing.
I don't know about the data. So there are social aspects to a project of this nature.
Mm-hmm.
So food waste is hard. If you looked up food waste reuse, East Bay Mud's facility in California would come up. And one of the big challenges is actually separating all the other stuff you get with food waste. It's amazing how many forks go in the same bin with the food waste, right? So source separation is the key with yard debris and food waste. There's a lot of energy value in food waste. So it would be a process to figure out, same as City of Portland, you guys, I think you put food waste in your green bin, right? Mm-hmm. So the green bin goes to the landfill and they have to figure out how to separate. Just take a piece of bread. How do I get that piece of bread into this other place where I want to create this mash that we're going to digest, right? There's just the social piece of that to educate and say, hey, we can do this. Maybe we put this in a separate bin, or there's just lots of ways to look at how you would implement that, but there's a ton of value there. And, there's an argument that yard debris may be better created using kind of blended with the back end when we make the compost, because we need the nutrients in the yard waste more on the compost side. So how that whole thing comes together is important, and it's a long process to create behavioral change at a household level.
Yeah, and that's to wrap around to your question, what can be done now is start educating folks and changing behaviors now. How can we get more households to put their food waste, say, in their green bin, or just practice those food separation practices? And that will, in the future, when we do have a facility up, that means that you already have your population source separating for you. So it's easier to get it in a mash to that facility.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, looks like Kelly has a question.
Yeah, well, maybe just more of a statement. Maybe Kavi and Serena, after our next waste materials meeting, we can give a brief update to the committee, because we're talking about expansion of food recycling at multifamily units, and some of the challenges that not landfill, for example, is facing. So we've got a bit more detail on this, and it may be helpful for us to present some of that information to the larger committee.
I had one last quick question on my end. For the new streams of food waste and like the brewery waste, I'm just wondering about the transport of that. I know you mentioned that the social equity piece of the location was considered in terms of being far away from, but is there, was it also considered a transport from current places to that location, and both the emissions and also the odor or other social impacts of that?
Yeah, we looked at the greenhouse. That was part of our greenhouse gas calculation. And let me know if I'm answering your question wrong. But so we looked at what does it take for the status quo to truck that from the location to the treatment location and then out to the fields, and then versus what would it look like for one of these other facilities. So for these other facilities, you're trucking it from the source generation point to the facility. And then from there you have products. So people can come and pick up the compost like you do from the landfill now. So that's kind of where the end of we counted the emissions at that point. So there is a net difference in the greenhouse gas emissions because you don't have that excess process of trucking from your facility out to fields and then land applying. So there's another greenhouse gas emission associated with that excess step, if that makes sense.
And I guess apart from the emissions, are there, I don't know how these things are transported or that the infrastructure for that already exists, and if there's any odor control issues related to transport as well?
That's a good question. Yes, we looked at traffic impacts. Those are mainly because it's just by truck traffic mainly. So we looked at the different impacts of traffic in areas based on the different technologies and the locations of different technologies. So that was included.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. I'm sure we could probably go into more detail, but it seems like we're really engaged, obviously, with the outcome of this. And I think there's opportunity, like was brought up by Bill and Mark, that the climate benefit has a particular interest to us. And since it's part of the plan, kind of knowing if there's any opportunities for incremental improvements that would, scale something slightly different where we could weigh in, I think would be valuable kind of throughout this process. If we have follow-ups, I'm sure we can follow up with you all or through our city staff member.
Yes, reach out to me. We have a website for the project too, a city website. I don't have the link off the top of my head, but should be able to find it on there. But yeah, I can certainly be the intermediary between our consultant and if you have any questions that I can't answer. But yeah, so we're looking forward to getting that final report done, and if we get that done, we'll make sure that you all have a chance to take a look.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
I've got to push stop.
So since we had a working lunch, we're just going to jump right in to our council goal prep. So I don't know, do we have slides for this or just conversation? Okay, great.
I don't have a slide. I can kind of like give a little bit of context though, if that'd be helpful. Okay, so if you all remember 2 years ago, we had an opportunity to provide input into council goal setting, which is coming up again this January. We talked about this a little bit last time, but last time it was a little bit hectic for us because you were a brand new group. So we wanted to just start the discussion about figuring out what the committee wants to contribute to the council goal input this year. And just as a reminder, the council goals, they set the priorities and allocate resources for the entire biennium. And for the climate action program, we don't actually have like really a base funding source for the program. So right now we rely on allocations from council goals in order to have like any meaningful amount of resources. We have a little bit of base funding as far as just, like a little bit of budget for just ongoing programmatic needs. But as far as like doing something kind of that's going to take actual resources, those have to be allocated during council goals. Otherwise it's much harder to try to get those later in the year. So this is kind of the opportunity to think about like, well, what do we want to accomplish in fiscal year 23 through 25? And, what kind of resources do we think that would take? So the kind of input that you share can really it's really up to you guys how you want to do it. Some of the thoughts that I have is like, on the one hand, you could be as specific as recommending specific CCAP strategies. Like last time, we weren't ready to do that in time for council goals. So we kind of had a placeholder and said like, let's implement the CCAP and we will recommend specific strategies, which worked fine. You could even do that again if you felt like you wanted to take a longer period of time next year to kind of figure out what you want to prioritize for the next biennium. If you knew what you wanted to focus on already, you could recommend those specific actions and say, we really want to make, focus big on these specific actions. You can, though, you're perfectly free to go like outside of just the realms of CCAP actions. You can give other types of bigger picture recommendations. So like if the committee was thinking it's an appropriate time to do like a CCAP update, that might be something that you want to share during council goal setting, which is actually something that we've been talking about internally. Like might be a good opportunity to do a CCAP update with the new biennium. Even if you wanted to, if there are initiatives that fall outside of the CCAP that you guys know you have been wanting to work on, it would be appropriate to bring up some of those types of things in council goal setting. Or even I was thinking like if there is certain capacity building that you guys have been thinking, I know, because I know with the climate emergency declaration, some of those considerations have come up, like you could recommend those types of things as well, basically anything that you want. So those are just some ideas of the directions you could take it. And then I just found, I forgot that this is what we did, but last time the way that this took shape, and I assume it will be the same this year, is we actually filled out this form. Do you guys remember that?
Mhm. Yeah, I was thinking about our priorities.
Yeah. I'll just pull it up on the screen.
And just so you guys know, the council goals are posted for anyone in this room or in that. So just if you want to take a glance at it.
So yeah, we had Mark. Mark was the one that went and did the presentation last time. It'll be the chair probably this time. It'll probably be probably Neil, even if you were to pick a new chair, just because since you're kind of working on it now, Neil and Serena. So the mission and the goals would probably say the same, but then the way that they ask the questions is like, what is the biggest problem you think the city should address? This honestly could probably stay the same too, because it was kind of generic. And then the vision, but then I think the main meat of it is like, what are suggested plans or objectives to achieve this change? So we can, and practical steps to measure progress towards the goal. So I assume we'll have to fill out something similar to this again, although they tend to like change it up fairly frequently. So I'm not positive we'll use this exact same form. This is another way we can start thinking about it. So for today, we didn't have, and when I was talking with Neil and Serena to prep, we didn't have really like, just kind of unstructured to just hear people's ideas generally, what you're thinking in terms of figuring out how you want to spend the next 2 years or just what your top of mind thoughts are. And then we're assuming that we'll want to take maybe a small subgroup after today's discussion to kind of refine and flesh out the ideas a little bit better. And then hopefully by the December meeting, we have something a little bit more cohesive that we can kind of discuss and refine. And depending on when the goal setting is, it's possible we'll have the January meeting to refine it as well, but I'm not exactly sure what date they'll choose to do the actual like session. So that's my context.
Great. Yeah. So that's the.
Oh, and what I did in case it was helpful in the memo that I provided, I kind of gave like a status report on like what projects are already underway, which ones have not started at all. So I know it's kind of like high level summary, but just to give you an idea of like how much progress has been made. And where there's opportunities, like particularly the ones that like need ECC initiation, those are ones that like will not be done unless this committee decides we want to do something like that. So that's it.
So it's kind of like Cassie said, we can do this. Like, I think what's going to be valuable at this point is more brainstorming than discussion. So then we can get the kind of different directions that we could go on the table. And then we can kind of flesh those out and then have discussion on like what we think makes sense moving forward. Because I think there's a million directions that we could go. There's a million things. So I think that this is really like for today's meeting, for the next 40 minutes or so, really clarifying what we're trying to do. So if there's questions about process, and then brainstorming directions we could go, I think would be valuable.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say too, I think this is a good time to kind of be reflective in what we've done, what we're happy with what we've done, and potentially what we feel maybe we were lacking in that we could emphasize ongoing in, how that would frame up in terms of goals and potential priorities as well.
I'm thinking back, last time we provided input on council goals, it was before we had done our own internal prioritization. So this, now we have that, right? So we have that ranking, and I know we had to make some subjective choices about which projects to actually address in our work plan, but should we be referencing that as we, come together as a committee to decide what our input should be, right? Because we've already done some of that work of which,
Yeah, I'll have to look back if we did like a ranking beyond, so we picked the top 5, which we recommended.
We did that spreadsheet that everyone.
Yeah, I guess we must have.
Subgroups that each address
Yeah.
categories.
Yeah, I will dig into that and try to find that. Because that would definitely be an appropriate way to go.
And then kind of a related process question, should we update that? Because now we've made some progress on those 5. And do we need to go through that process again of deciding internally what our next priorities are?
I did for this.
I'm going to jump in because it's a comment. I think just we maybe need to revisit the CCAP. It's old. It's 2018 or something like that, right? And the prioritization we did back then. And this is a lame duck speaking. Okay, sorry, but anyway, I look at some of the items that are on the CCAP. There's a lot of them are still really relevant. We haven't gotten around to them. We prioritized them, but I think we've come up with new things over that time period. And I just think a high level thing needs to be done is to go back and maybe take another look at it and see if we still agree with what we came up with the last time the council goals were presented. So I think that's a good place to start. Let's just go back through this, go back through the CCAP, say, is this still what we think? Or should this be moved up? Or is there an opportunity here that maybe is pressing in the next 2 years that we can take advantage of? Or so has anything changed? So I think that's a good place to start. And Cassie mentioned it, and I had it written down on something I wanted to add. I also think maybe the city, the council needs a little update on what the city has been accomplished. If they haven't already, maybe they already have, but on their portion of the CCAP, because there's opportunities there, like what came up today. Then that takes money, and that's got to be in the goals, right? And then I guess so I guess we were talking about I got another one, but that can come later. That's a brainstorming, but I just think maybe revisiting the CCAP and just making sure before we say, let's pick the top 5 of what we picked 2 years ago.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think Mary has something.
Just that everybody's joking this morning at our leadership meeting about the lawyers being the downers of the group, which I resented, but just a reality check. So the time is pretty tight. The city manager told us this morning to hold January 23rd, the week of January 23rd for the council goal setting, because they want it done before the budget cycle. So it's pretty fast. So just think about that as you decide what you might want to do. I agree with Bill. I do think that the document might be somewhat dated, but just remember that stemmed from a council resolution. So if that is something that you want to revisit, I think you probably want council direction, and it needs to be a council priority. And I'm cannot encourage you enough to think long and hard about what you want council to do. There will be many demands to this council, and they are hearing loud and clear, staff are tapped out and we're not hiring new people right now. So you just need to be really deliberative in what you want, new things you want this council to take on, even in the next 2 years.
And that's why an update, like if we were to do an update, it should come, like the recommendation should be that we do an update, and then that would be like a focus of the biennium so that we could allocate resources to it. And just to give a little bit of context, and this is kind of like just super fresh discussion that we've just started brainstorming internally, but because the current council and the new council, as compared to the council we had when we did the original CCAP update, they themselves have a higher interest in environmental and climate topics, and they have certain things that they would like to do that aren't in the CCAP. The climate friendly and equitable communities rules has brought up a lot of that, and there's a little bit of uncertainty about the future of those rules, but there are some things that the council may want to pursue, even if the rules are become like legally not something that we're beholden to. And so we've kind of talked about like there could be an opportunity to update the CCAP and include, so even from the council's perspective, there's like things that they might want to contribute that we just didn't really have that same level of engagement last time. This committee's also brought up things like around natural gas and electrification that haven't been in the CCAP. The council has expressed interest in that. So that's kind of where we've been thinking like it actually might be an appropriate time for that. But it would be a fairly significant undertaking that the council would then need to prioritize, like, are they willing to spend the time on that too? So, and if this committee doesn't want to recommend that, like, you don't have to go that way. But that's just to give some context on like why we bring it up.
That's exactly where I was going to go with my sort of process input, is that we should be very practical and politically aware that there is a very limited budget we have to work with from the council's effort and resources. And we should be thoughtful about what we recommend in terms of what will be priorities for them as well. And sort of thinking about what, there are some new city council members, and we should think about what some of their priorities are and think about how, the gubernatorial race turned out and what that might mean about state policy, that we should sort of think broadly about this space that we're working in. And it is a very favorable city council right now. So it makes sense. I guess what I'm suggesting is, I don't know, Cassie, if this is something the city's already going to be doing, or we do it ourselves to sort of look and think, okay, from these exogenous factors, what are some signals that tells us about things that are likely to be more successful now than otherwise in terms of gathering council energy and potentially state funding.
Yeah, and I think the way it kind of works for like a city staff perspective is like that kind of works out through the goal setting process, where you've got the advisory committees that give their input, and then we go into discussions with the council, and then we kind of find out where those overlap with the council's like natural interests and stuff. So part of that is stuff that like from our end kind of shakes out through the council setting process. But I think it's a really good thought to think for you all to consider, to the extent that you can like figure out kind of what those good things would be. But I think we're doing that assessment through the goal setting process, not really like in advance for you guys to factor in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because we were thinking about the transportation plan before, and I recognize the way the election went, we might have a little more interest in some of the trails and Hawthorne Bridge and these sorts of factors that maybe it makes sense to think a little more about how we can piggyback the same way this digester question is something, can we piggyback on these big investments the city's going to make anyways? If there are other sort of big investment priorities we can anticipate, we'll get a lot of council support. Does it feel like that is something we would know before we've got to set our own goals?
I mean, I think what you could know is probably like just collectively what you all know of the individual counselors and kind of what's been going on. Like, I don't think we'll have like an analysis of that to like provide to you.
Gotcha.
But just you can, but it's, I mean, I think it's smart for you to be thinking that way, just based off of what you know of them, the existing counselors and the new counselors, to kind of factor that in. But because we don't know for sure. We don't say like, even if we kind of have those ideas in our heads, we don't say like, oh, surely it's going to be this. It all shakes out during council goal setting. And then that's when we're.
I mean, watching how you all work, you do a good job of going from the big picture down into the project level. So the big picture is redoing the climate action plan, right? And maybe reassessing priorities. If you choose to do that, it might delay implementation of some more immediate things you want to do. Would you rather, but it might set the stage for the future, including future election and all of that. So that might be a better use of your time, but then it would just mean that diving into individual, you might not have as much bandwidth in council goals and in staff support to do implementation. So that's kind of what you need to think about. I wasn't saying don't do it, just if you do that, you don't implement until you decide what is in that plan. And then that, so like, do you like to be at that high level, or are you like, oh gosh, we really need to do things in the next 2 years? We'd rather be moving projects through, or I'd like the home energy score, whatever your ideas are, which would you rather be moving through? Because it takes political capital for council to move things through. And you've seen it, you've been at all these meetings, right? It's a lot. And that was a relatively simple project from our perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the code, we had examples from other places. It just wasn't super complicated like some things are really complicated.
And that's where I think like looking at the list of the projects that have not been started yet and kind of taking a look at that and being like, are there things on there that you all are like, no, it would be more impactful for us to move these things forward right now? Or when you look at that list, do you feel like a lot, they're just like, I don't know, just kind of not really hitting the mark, and you'd rather focus on like, refocusing on what you guys all actually want to do? And I do think also a lot has changed even internally since the first CCAP to now, because we didn't even have it wasn't an established program yet. We had like a different level of even commitment from the city when we were putting together the old plan. So there's certain aspects of the old plan that just like, when we look at the actions now, they're just kind of like, they don't really fit. They're not that actionable, partially just because of the way that the context has changed. So like sometimes when I read through some of the actions, I'm like, yeah, we can't even really necessarily do those ones. But again, it's not for, it's for you guys to look at and see, like, if you feel like, no, I really am excited about moving forward with these things, or I think we need to like revisit what we're gonna do. And then, like I said too, it can be outside of the CCAP too, if there's like, I don't know, other bigger picture things that you're thinking of.
Yeah.
But again, with a resource constrained situation, like also being smart about that, like then just bringing up totally new things out of the blue is unlikely to be successful, actually, to your point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm feeling a mix of that. I was part of the CCAP when it was originated, so I understand a lot of the ideas and how it arrived the way it did, but there's a lot that has changed since that. We've gone through just internally as well as globally a lot of different things, and there's a lot of new rules and regulations that are popping up that kind of align with some of that CCAP. And then, like Cassie said, there's some stuff that just isn't as relevant. So there's a part of me that's like, yeah, I want to spend that time. And I'm just kind of rambling here, letting you guys think about how I'm thinking about this. I would like to spend that time to regroup and reassociate and know what our current state is and what tools are coming our way. But there's also this urgency for like initiation and continuing that momentum. So
it looks like you have one meeting more or less, maybe two, probably two meetings, right, before that January timeline. And I wasn't suggesting that we throw out what was done earlier, but I think at least looking at it, just making sure we're not missing something, or maybe some things really are important that in that plan that we need to bring forward that are going to require some council action. I think that's what I was suggesting. I think it would be really good for the city to act, like, it was really exciting, that the home energy scores, finally something concrete is almost going to happen, right? And that's good. And I think you need those. You need to have some successes and some actions that take place out of all the things we talk about. Because we can talk and talk and talk and talk and deliberate and figure, okay, what if, who's going to oppose, all that stuff. But it would be great to have something happen. And to have it happen, you got to have the council behind you, and you got to have money to do it. So, you got two meetings. So whatever you can do in those two meetings and look at the past and the opportunities that are here now and the future, that's, I don't know, maybe you gotta break up into subgroups again. I don't know. That might help.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing some like general things is that there are, and it might be even good for us to, or if we create a subgroup to actually write down what we see as the contextual changes that have happened both between our original climate action plan and our committee starting, because that was a significant chunk of time. And then what has happened in the last 2 years that's changed, both in the work that we've done, stuff at the city, how state policy interacts with the plan, which both in terms of capacity, how it's addressed, like I'm thinking CFEC and I'm thinking the House Bill 2020, like there's a lot of things that that are important, I think, whether we're going through a full process or not, would help provide some context to council of where we're at and what we want to do. And I also, I think we're at a better place of thinking not just about kind of the next project in the short timeline, but thinking about with all of that context, then we can help make some more better guided decisions as a group to look forward over a 2-year time period. And it could be saying, we really do think that we need to look into this, but we don't think it's going to be in the first year. We have some priorities that we want to get done, but we do want to incorporate these other things. So we want to include that process in year 2024, whatever that is. So
that seems like a really nice way to update the preamble, because I think otherwise the city council might start to glaze over. I'll say, having done this before, they've got every committee lined up, everyone gets a couple minutes, and they're just getting bombarded with all of this and say, hey, we're catching you up. We're sensitive to what you're thinking about. Get them to pay attention. And then when we get to our punchline, it's more likely to feel like it's going to fit, and they don't have to worry if we're disconnected.
I just want to share a couple of thoughts too. So looking at the memo that Cassie shared in terms of an update, at the end it mentions that there's 25 actions in progress or complete and 17 not started. And so I think the big picture view I would like as a committee member is, CCAP has specific targets and goals of 40% by 2030. And I would love to know how we're doing in terms of tracking progress on that. And I think one thing that at least came out even from the one meeting the Climate Emergency Declaration Working Group kind of had, the few of us that met, was kind of, I think we've been operating under this kind of perspective of like there's constraints and not necessarily just saying that we can only do what we can do, but also letting council know that if we want to meet the targets that are set in CCAP, here's what else we need. So if there's more staff time, that would be helpful, or more resources, that would be helpful. Kind of making council aware of that to meet those targets, this is what we need, and making it clear for their kind of planning process. So I do want to just share that and take this opportunity to kind of mention that at this time.
Yeah, so that's the capacity building, and that could be recognizing, like we can talk through that. That could be recognizing, that could be a request of, we can ask for whatever we want.
We can.
Whatever we want. And I think that's like kind of what I'm hearing is like, well, if that's what we're, if this is what our recommendation is, it's what our recommendation is. We obviously will, work with whatever we have. I think some of those recommendations that we've talked about in the past as well is like saying, okay, well, of the things that are under our control versus city control, some of our recommendations can be things that we're not as involved in. That's like, we're an advisory board. We're not just a working with the city. Otherwise we'd be staff, right? So some of that can, we can kind of separate those goals, and some of it could be looking at of the work that we can do. Do we need to ask to expand that capacity too? I know we've had that conversation in the past. So that, there's multiple levels of what that capacity looks like that could have different levels of feasibility and traction.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Neil. Like, it doesn't have to be like, you're right. Like, it doesn't have to be like things that the committee will take on by itself. Like, you don't need to think about it that way, because a lot of the organizations that come and provide input it's more than just the advisory committee. So there's people that they have no even ability to contribute to what they're asking for. It's just an opportunity to say, this is what I think the city should be doing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, definitely think like that. And then quick on just as an update, I guess, related to what Kavi was saying, is that by the end of the year, we should actually have our greenhouse gas emissions inventory update. So with respect to the bigger picture goals, the 40% and the 70%, we'll know if we've made any progress on that. We should have it by the end of the year. It might be like mid-January, so it might be slightly awkward timing to tie into this, but just something for you guys to know that we'll have that moving forward. And then kind of in conjunction with that, I have started working on building out our like dashboard for tracking progress. That is going to take like probably 6 months for us to get up and running because we're building out like an internal dashboard for that. But with that, we're attempting to start like showing and tracking progress towards the targets in the CCAP. Some are trackable, some are not really. So that's part of what we have to like figure out is like, what data sources do we even have? It may result in us being like, yeah, we set these targets. Like there are some targets that we set that we just don't even know if we can measure them. So it's really useful. So we'll have some of that information, again, not in time for this, but in the next year, in the next half year, you guys will have more information to work with moving forward. And I also thinking like, once we're in movement of actually tracking that information, it will better inform us like how we track information, like what targets we set in the future. Like, because when we set the targets, we just didn't have capacity to fully analyze like, well, what do we have the ability to track, So we're kind of figuring out some of that now. And then that's an improvement we can make next time.
I'm glad you just brought that up because that was going to be my next question, because it was I think it was a 5-year check-in on the inventory, and that's really important. And being able to measure it, I mean, that's an amazing goal. That's one you need. And the other thing, 7 years till 2030 that's going to fly by. So that maybe should influence the way you're thinking about what gets done. The next time you do it, you'll have the next update will be only 2 more years left. So back to actionable items.
Just a clarifying question on the process to make sure I understand correctly. Are we planning to reprioritize actions again for the next 2 years prior to council goal setting recommendation, or is that something we'll embark on once the new committee members join?
We theoretically could say, this is our work plan for the next 2 years, but I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. Unless everybody secretly all agrees on something, then we could, but and we will have new committee members. So I think it's
important to bring them.
It would be good to.
Because I was going to suggest from that process point, I was thinking the same thing. If maybe for our next meeting, if everyone does their homework and comes with a few of the actionable items or the existing action plan items, or if you really want to go out on a limb, something new that we, maybe we each take a little bit of time to speak to what we think the priorities are. I don't know if there's a more systematic way. I know we had that scoring system that we used when we did it before, but if there's more of an ad hoc way to do it, if like Bill's point, we really only one meeting to make some real progress on it.
Yeah, I mean, if we pull together a subgroup as a result of this conversation, we could start with that subgroup, just using this list from the memo of projects that have not yet started, because there are only 17 that have not yet started. And you'll look at those, like some of them are not necessarily things that are immediately actionable anyway. So we could start by just having that subgroup kind of reviewing that and figuring out if there's even like, there might be some really obvious like agreement within that group of like, oh yeah, we definitely don't want to like not do this one. So we could start there, might be the best way. I think it would be a little hard to pull off like a full evaluation, but then that could be part of what that group brings back to discuss in December. And based on what Mary said about that January 23rd, if that's when they're bringing in the community groups too, because sometimes they do that before the council goal setting retreat.
Oh.
But if we don't do the community groups until the week of the 23rd, then we will have January as well.
It'd be the second meeting in January. That first meeting is always never has anything. So it'd be the second meeting in January by that timeline.
Okay, so then I think because we're the second Thursday of the month, so we will have the January meeting to finalize.
Okay. Would we want to have something draft though that we can approve though as a committee by then?
Yeah.
That could be done in between the December and January.
nothing else happens in that time period either.
Well, it's a lot more fun trying to finalize that by next month.
Yeah, that is helpful. And also process wise, if without doing a full reworking of the climate action plan, if there is a like, and I don't know if we would get there, but if we as a group looked at it and maybe with council direction had not a complete redoing of it, but like a very clear edit or addendum, is there an option of something other than a complete redoing of the process that we could do? Just, I'm not suggesting that this is something that we could do, but could we kind of ask for that if we had a very clear direction of saying, hey, we think this is really important, council thinks this is really important, we can amend the CCAP instead of having to redo it?
And that's just by motion. I mean,
Okay.
it's not a hard process wise.
Yeah.
It's not difficult reading the document and making it, like sometimes when things are amended, if there's inconsistency, it can be harder to go back and forth. And I haven't
Okay.
read them in a while to know if that would make sense. But if there's like only certain areas that you think should be updated, yeah,
Mhm.
you could update it, first amendment, first update, and council
Okay.
could just adopt that.
Yeah, like that could just be like a couple month process of like looking at the existing actions, figuring out if there's any you want to cross off, any you want to any you want to elevate, and then saying what new actions to add.
Yeah, I think
Like
that
it could be
revision,
something like that.
The comment I had put, the note I had written was revisit it, not redo it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what you're talking about, I think.
So I've been starting a little bit of a list of what I've heard of general brainstorm ideas of like different areas that we could go with this recommendation. But I want to see if there's other kind of directions or ideas of things that could go in that recommendation. Also, Kelly, you know, it's hard being online. If you have anything that you want to add in too.
You know, just kind of taking everyone's I think a working group would be helpful so that we can actually dive into a revisit of the, basically restating what everyone has said.
Okay.
I did have one specific thing, which we just spent a bunch of money doing an EV readiness plan. Well, 2 years, maybe there's some implementation in there that we should be recommending.
Yeah.
To start with, that was one specific item, I think, as a brainstorm item to throw in there. You can debate it clearly.
I just want to quickly point out, we talked about 17 actions actions that haven't started, but looking at Cassie's memo again, there's 12 bullet points under CCAP projects not started, but need ECC initiation because there's some that don't need initiation from us. So there's fewer than 17, there's 12 that are listed there. That's one thing I want to point out. And then the other part was kind of going back to the capacity building. I think we talked briefly about kind of the asking council for whatever we think we need. And also, I think we briefly discussed this. I just want to put it out there as a brainstorm idea, not as something I'm endorsing at this time. But we'd also talked about potentially if it would be helpful to have permanent working groups and potentially adding more committee members or requesting more committee members to then have larger, like 3 or 4 working groups that can focus specifically on those actions in more detail over the next 2 years and kind of reorganizing the committee a little bit more, if that would be helpful for capacity side of things as well. So I don't put that idea out there if that's a good time to put it out there.
Yeah. And yes, brainstorming, not endorsing in general. But sounds like it'd be valuable to have, gosh, this chair goes back way too far. It sounds like it'd be helpful to have a working group help with the short timeline between now and the next meeting of kind of wrapping our minds around everything that's been brought up so far, looking at those, the work that's been done and hasn't, and maybe summarizing that in a digestible way for the committee, and then creating the actual draft recommendation. So then we can discuss at the next meeting, and then we'll have a draft that we can fine tune and vote on in January. I'm assuming that timeline works. Who wants to do that? Great. Corey, great. And then
I'm gonna look at it for sure.
Okay.
It's helpful to have
You want to be in the group?
If anyone, I've let anyone else wants to.
Is anyone remote?
But I will if no one else wants to. But I sound like Kelly.
How many do we want and when do we plan to meet or like time frame?
I mean, it'd be between this meeting and the next meeting. So I'd send a doodle out. Obviously there's Thanksgiving in there. So my guess is that it would be in early December.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to support.
Okay.
Great. And then one of the two of us will.
Okay. So then we have Covey, Rory, Kelly, and then I'll just do Neil/Serena and we'll see which either of you is available.
Yep.
That would be perfect. And yeah, so I think for that group, I do think I am glad because the CCAP project's not started that need ECC initiation as its own category here. So you can just look at that section and take a look at those items and see like which of those there are kind of like, oh yeah, we need to, we definitely want to those, or just look at those and be like, is this a list that we are willing to work with just this list in the next 2 years, or do we want to augment that? Could be a good way to think about it. Cool. That's great.
Other broad thoughts. I think another broad thought that I have is just trying to figure out, we've also in this last 2 years we've been trying to figure out, this is a new committee for the city. So figuring out how our interactions work with council, how we take if like, well, the ECC should make a decision about that, or we'd love to hear their feedback from that. There was a chunk of time where 3/4 of our meetings were those recommendations. Like, I think we can, not just through this process, but also just like through the time that we're at right now, we can start to think about that of how we can show up and participate in existing things happening in the city, and how we can respond to the questions that come up of our group. So I think we have that opportunity to think through this process is a good reminder. But I think kind of as I'm thinking of these other pieces, I think it's valuable for us to figure out how we can serve the city the best. Yeah.
That's an interesting question, and thinking about how other committees have commented on the home energy score, for example. Should we be paying more attention to what other committees are doing and commenting or having input than we currently do?
Well, so I think we've been continuing to experiment a little bit like on our side, like how we structurally set this up. And so like I brought up last time, the way that we haven't been great about doing this really systematically well, but what the thought is that, and this is what happened with the home energy score, is we have these quarterly council updates where we staff update the council on progress on city projects that are part of council goals. And then the advisory committees are invited to observe those meetings. And then at the end, they have like a few minutes to share any feedback they want and on the topics that were presented. So that's how the home energy score feedback came up, because we presented during the quarterly update and then the advisory committees responded to that. So moving forward, like we'll make sure that the ECC is invited to those quarterly updates and is aware of the topics. You don't have to participate in every one, but if there's a topic that looks interesting. So that's the way we've kind of set up like a way to do that, and to kind of keep tabs on the other projects going on. Even that, like, I think we're still trying to figure out if that is really the best way to do it, because we find at least a few of us have talked about, we don't actually think that system works the best, because those advisory committees didn't have an opportunity to actually be informed and educated before they provided the input. They don't have time to go back to their advisory committees and actually talk about the things. So anyway, we are trying to figure that out. That's on our minds, is to figure out how to plug you guys into the other committees more. So we're trying to figure that out. So you guys are free to like do whatever type of sleuthing you want as far as following the other committees, but it's something that we're trying to figure out structurally, like a better way to do it too.
It seems like if we can, if we're sort of introducing or bringing this climate lens to everything that the city's doing, and we should be there to help check. And I don't know, Cassie, maybe you sort of are able to play that role already. Oh, there is a nexus with our climate action plan on this proposal. And, if you nudge it a little bit, the same way we were watching to see if this alternatives should be nudged potentially to be more consistent with climate action plan. Do you think there are things like that?
Yeah, like I try to keep an eye out for them. But but it all just kind of happens like on a case by case basis. And that's why we have had like some city projects come in, but it's not all of them comprehensively. So whether I identify those or if there are things that you guys hear about, then you should definitely feel free to be like, hey, we'd like to learn more about that. But yeah, we just don't have like a great system of, because there's just so many things going on. And I think that's one of the things that happened with the home energy score is that we did a bunch of public outreach, and it wasn't part of my public outreach plan to like go to those advisory committees. And I anticipated that they would hear about it through the other public outreach we were doing and say, oh, we'd like to get a presentation on that. But that just didn't really happen. So that was like a good learning lesson about going and being proactive about that. But that's like other committees don't necessarily take that proactive step either. So again, like, I don't know.
It's kind of a unique committee because you actually sometimes have the power to move a whole project through, like this home energy code, like all the committees don't necessarily do that because you're implementing a plan. So part of your role is to really, so I'm thinking, I can't believe I'm saying this because I've been like resistant to this charter thing the city does. Engineers do charters for all their projects, but I'm coming around to thinking it's a really good idea because they identify stakeholders. They say, who are all the city staff departments involved? Like I should have seen this coming. I've been around and we staff all the different committees, the NLA and affordable housing. If I thought about it for 2 seconds, I would have said, they're going to care about a home energy score. Actually, as would HREC, had they been really ready to engage at this level, they were still working on kind of their plan. We should probably do that. If you initiate something, you maybe think at the very beginning, like the chair, the vice chair, and Cassie, let's do like a charter or an engagement plan and list out from the start. We do community.
Well, and it's a little hard because we actually did that for the home energy score. And I talked to many staff and I said, should I go to these advisory committees? And I was told, no, do not go to these advisory committees. So it was like, and that's just a little bit of, so anyway, it's a little hard. Like we do the best we can. And sometimes like anything, like it's when things come to a head that all of a sudden because a lot of those committees, you go to them in July and they're like, we're too busy right now or whatever else it is. Or the staff are like, we're really busy right now. But then it comes to a head and all of a sudden that's when everyone is like, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? But that's life, So we do our best and we can always do better.
Yeah.
But it's not to say that we just like have not been trying to do that.
Yeah, that stakeholder, we've talked about stakeholder analysis in a lot of everything, anytime we convene as a group, right? Like who do we need to talk to? I think, lesson learned, like, let's just make sure we're being extremely mindful about internally who we need to be talking to, or at least sending out communication that they can read on their own if they're interested.
What we should have done is invited the advisory committees to that Q&A.
Right, or to come here to you.
Yeah.
But, and hope that they do the same as they move through processes.
I think Mary's right. In a lot of cases, they're not like, they don't have their own like projects from scratch in the same way.
I think it will be useful to make sure we listen to the recommendations for goal settings for all the committees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be a great idea.
It's also good when they read the proposal completely before objecting. I mean, we answered a lot of the questions.
Yeah, without that full, it's hard to provide that feedback and as an individual, because, I was at that presentation too. Like, well, I can't respond to everything that was just mentioned because it's like not even close to what we've had as a conversation as a group. So yeah, I think there's opportunity there. And I'll also add that we have also weighed in, just like looking back over the last 2 years, we've weighed into Transportation Bond Oversight Committee prioritization. We've weighed into the city's climate friendly, equitable communities rulemaking process. And largely those have been through Cassie bringing them up or us bringing it up, but not coming from the outside of them saying, hey, we want the ECC to be a part of this process.
Yeah, and I am gonna be on this utility advisory group now, which is gonna be an hour and a half every month. So.
Oh, wow.
But inviting each other if there's things that's kind of part of the intent of that bike rack that we haven't had to utilize much lately, but the intent of it is if you're actively out and about personally or professionally, and you're seeing things that we may not know about or have addressed or need to learn more about and want to take ownership of that, we can create a space for it.
And the planning commission work sessions, Pauline's been really great about doing those work sessions that we've been invited to a few of those. So that's another way for some things.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we have some direction. I'll also point out that Bill and Peter will have more capacity starting in January because they won't be on the committee. So we can still tap you as special resources.
What are you suggesting? Consulting work?
Neil, so we're gonna do a subcommittee to work on this and
Yeah.
type something up. I would love just to make sure before we end this conversation that you've been taking notes.
Yeah.
To hear any like other input that folks not on the subcommittee might have that we can use going into whatever we put together.
Are you talking about individual actions?
Yeah, I think because we've talked a lot about
our
process, but if we're gonna go in and start looking at like what we prioritized for this committee a year and a half ago and trying to summarize what we've all talked about today, I just want to make sure we have a complete picture before we put together that
And
draft.
before we start that conversation, just a clarifying question, this working group, we are trying to come back to the next meeting with some recommendations for what we would like to recommend to council for their goal setting process.
That's
We're not necessarily coming back, but here are the actions or any of those things yet that we want to start the process with the new committee members. Did I understand that correctly?
Well, I think we'll at least look at those actions. Just, we talked about like seeing if among that subgroup, there's alignment around like really high interest actions, right?
And yeah, and recognizing that the recommendation is going to be coming from the group. So it's really trying to organize and coordinate that into something that we actually could handle in a meeting.
Right.
So finding general themes, kind of proposing, bringing them to the group. But yeah, you're opening what else are we like, you're going to be seeing things. What else do other people kind of know?
Exactly.
So I know that like there have been conversations about natural gas and electrification. That is already on my list. There is EV plan is on the list of notes that I've already heard from today. One of the things that I didn't hear today, but we've had conversations in the past is conversations about our involvement in water resource work in the environment and climate as a whole, or things outside of the ECC or outside of the climate action plan, but fitting under the ECC umbrella, other things.
Looking back at the list of the items that are currently underway, do you really feel like, Cassie, there's nothing more we can do on those right now? Is that?
No, I don't feel that way. I mean, a bunch of the ones that are underway, like even of the 5 that we're working on this biennium, like some of them are more or less like there's the 100% renewable energy. There's the community green tariff, which we could be doing more work on, but we kind of decided that it's such a complicated topic that we kind of put it on hold a little bit. There's the revolving loan fund, which right now, so that's listed as like something that is underway, but again, it's like another one that we've kind of put on hold because there wasn't a good idea for. And then, so there's some like that I guess like would still need involvement and some movement, but maybe not in a super like linear from start to finish way.
Yeah, I guess that's how I was thinking for this subcommittee, looking at those items too. Seems like a lot of them are things we probably still need to.
And that's why the only ones that are like done are the ones that are listed as complete. And the ones that are currently underway, yeah, I mean, most of those, like, we're still in the middle of, some of them don't require ECC involvement necessarily, like developing community solar projects.
Why doesn't that mean ECC?
Well, I guess the ECC could, but it's like, those are happening out there. But I guess I just didn't know of like what action the ECC could take to develop community solar projects specifically, but there are projects out there, you can participate in the community solar program right now. So the committee could, if you wanted to, you could take some of those things up and say like, we want to augment this somehow. But in the way we've been thinking about it so far, there wasn't like a really clear action item.
No, are you already on the transportation committee as well? Some committee like that, is that right?
No.
No.
I have gone,
Okay.
I think we asked and I gave an official Yeah, I don't have a
Okay.
seat, but I was asked to give our committee's ideas at one point in the process.
I guess I was also wondering along those lines, if there's sort of big things where maybe we could put our weight behind it to help move things forward.
That's top for me to bring up the subcommittee, but I think updating our transportation system plan to comply with the new CPAC rules will like potentially have a huge gain as far as reducing.
Yeah.
I would like to see that be one of our priorities.
Yeah.
We already said this, but I think we have, I think we have more power in piggybacking on things that are already in play and supporting them than besides some of the stuff that we've done to date, initiating from scratch. For now.
Yeah.
That's
And that can help with the prioritization process.
Yeah.
If like part of our role is advising, and so much of the CCAP was not individual projects that we're doing, but accomplishing these goals and these things that are happening in other places, and saying this is really high priority. And they're going to be hearing that from the other groups that it's related to as well, around transportation in particular and building.
Yeah, I'd like to see even more bike friendliness.
Yeah. I don't know anything about our new counselors, but I think that might.
At a high level, that, you know, what a major factor, billions of dollars behind it, the whole Inflation Reduction Act, and that didn't exist when CCAP. So if we can be, this committee can be kind of a point source of information on that, and how can the city somehow, I mean, it's kind of like a Wild West gold rush of money funneling in and clean tech funneling in. And I'm trying to keep an eye on that as well. I don't know how else, or a better fit of a committee in city government than just one to try to be like, is there a mechanism for the city of Bend to optimize those funds, and how do they get from federal level into projects on the ground in our city?
Yeah, US Department of Energy has a funding opportunity announcement coming out in the next couple of weeks that's targeted at renewable and climate adaptation grants for utilities and communities with utilities. I don't know if the utilities, I think all the utilities are basically aware of this, but there are things like that, and they need communities to partner with them for
Right.
successful grant
Exactly.
applications. Yeah.
And I attend
First gets the money.
Yeah, I attend a lot of like every single webinar I can watch about so I'm tracking those opportunities as best I can, but would of course love anyone else to also be tracking those opportunities. It's so complicated.
That's on people's minds. That's on
Yeah.
my mind.
Yeah.
And that is,
we should share those and where the opportunities are.
education and outreach campaigns are in our strategy, and I don't think we're prioritized because we didn't have something specific that that didn't already have a lot of weight behind it, like existing energy trust programs or whatever that is. So this could be, I think what I'm hearing is this could be an opportunity to say, hey, there is a really awesome opportunity that engagement priority might rise because of this contextual change.
Yeah, it was all DC before COVID. Does it even count?
Okay, we are looking for an update from waste and material subgroup.
Well, I think there's not a major update, so I think we can jump ahead and we can provide updates next month.
I mean, I can just speak.
Well, we get agenda review stuff up. Do you want to just go?
Yeah,
over
for
that?
30 seconds. Kelly, Cubby, myself, I think that was all of us. Am I missing somebody? That was part. We met with the different subgroups. Environmental Center, the waste haulers, the regional waste haulers, and who else?
Well, the county and the environmental center. We didn't meet with the waste haulers.
Sorry, yeah, the county representatives. But we did talk about the waste haulers in general and their relationship, and just it was more of a just understanding where everyone's sitting and current state of things. We haven't done a regroup we haven't huddled as a group to talk through anything that we've learned from those sessions with the stakeholders yet. So I'm sure that we have another meeting next week, right?
Mhm.
Great.
Okay. Sounds like there's a meeting that needs.
Oh, okay. Well, really quick for December, we're going to talk about council goal input to finish this conversation, and then prep for the chair and vice chair elections. And then we'll talk about the rest later, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels like council goal input could fill the whole time.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Be snowy Thursday.
It's Tuesday today. I don't know what I do.
Been really off on my days of the week.
That's supposed to be nice.
Like Thursday or
You guys,
Friday.
I have stipend cards, so please collect one. Write the number down. Well, we'll do this outside.
Yeah.
Well, do you know, are there any?
Oh, Charlie Fire, I wish.
Of